When Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett calmly questioned Melania Trump's visa history, it wasn't just a MIC drop moment. It was a mirror held up to America's deepest hypocrisy. It was the kind of moment that stops everything, like the air itself, pulls back to listen. The hearing room on Capitol Hill had been loud for over an hour. Accusations flew, tempers boiled, cameras rolled. The usual circus. And there she was, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, seated, composed, flipping through her papers, as if the nonsense bouncing off the walls didn't bother her. But it did. You could see it in the way her hand paused mid-turn, in the way her eyes scanned the panelist across from her. "You question my loyalty to this country?" she said, looking straight ahead, not yelling, not flinching. "If we're going there, should we talk about Melania's visa history too?" The room froze. Not figuratively. Actually froze. The Republican panelist who'd been coming at her with veiled shots about real Americans looked like someone had just yanked the battery out of his brain. Even some of the Democrats looked unsure if they'd heard her right, but Crockett didn't blink, didn't smirk, didn't gloat. She just kept her eyes steady, like she knew exactly what she was doing and had been waiting for the right moment to say it. That one sentence hit harder than any speech, any slogan, any press release. And the moment it aired, just 10 seconds clipped from a 2-hour hearing. Twitter lit up like dry leaves on a fire line. By the time the hearing ended, her name was trending. Hashtags like Jasmine said it and Melania green card were spreading faster than reporters could catch up. But here's the part people missed. She didn't call for anyone's deportation. She didn't say Melania should be removed from the country. What she said and how she said it was surgical. Because for years, immigrant families, especially black and brown ones, have been grilled, doubted, and picked apart by people waving flags and asking loaded questions like, "Do you even love this country?" Crockett turned that mirror right back. It wasn't just about Melania. It was about the selective outrage, the double standards, the way some folks always find ways to draw the line between us and them, but the backlash, oh, it came fast. That night, conservative radio ran headlines like "Democrat attacks Melania's immigration status," and "Did Crockett just suggest deporting a former First Lady?" The headlines were loud, but the actual clip, that told a different story. And that's what made it all hit even harder, because people weren't just reacting to what she said. They were reacting to what it exposed. By morning, Crockett had 3 interview requests on the table, including one from a major morning show. Her team, though exhausted, knew they had to move quickly. "We say nothing?" her assistant asked, pacing. Crockett just shook her head. "No," she said. "We say everything, just not the way they want us to." But while her words were being replayed across every screen in America, something else was bubbling beneath the surface. And it wasn't going away quietly. Long before that congressional hearing, long before the camera zoomed in on her face like she was the only person in the room, Jasmine Crockett had already made peace with how people saw her. She knew what it meant to speak plainly in a place that runs on polished lies and handshakes. She knew that a black woman in power who didn't soften her tone or shrink into respectability was always going to be labeled angry, radical, or worse, ungrateful. But she wasn't new to any of this. Before Congress, she was defending people in courtrooms across Dallas. Public defender. No spotlight, no cameras, just stories. Mothers trying to keep custody of their children. Teens pulled over for things that never made sense. Men who got judged the minute they stepped into the courtroom, not by evidence, but by where they were born or how they looked. She remembered one case in particular. A quiet kid, 19, arrested for possession because of a traffic stop that never should have happened. Nothing violent, no record, but the prosecution wouldn't back off. She stood up in court and said, "You're building cages around this, boys. Future for something you wouldn't even book your nephew for." It rattled the judge. It didn't win the case, but it won the room. And the boy got probation instead of jail. She carried that courtroom fire into every space she walked into after that, right into the Texas House and eventually all the way to Capitol Hill. But Washington, that was a different kind of game. In Congress, you're expected to play it smart, which really just means say less, blend in, keep it civil, smile even when it burns. Jasmine never liked playing dumb, and she sure wasn't going to stay quiet. So by the time she was sitting in that hearing room, facing a smug former prosecutor from Florida who kept throwing phrases like American values and foundational loyalty at her, she wasn't reacting out of emotion. She was calling out a script she'd seen recycled her whole life, and she was tired of it because it always went the same way. First, they question your background, then your motives, then your patriotism. And when you finally snap back, calmly, precisely, with receipts, they pretend to be shocked that you had the audacity to speak. It's not just annoying, it's dangerous. And that's why her line, "Should we talk about Melania's visa history too?" wasn't pulled from nowhere. It was built on years of watching double standards flourish in broad daylight. Let's be real. Melania Trump's immigration path had always been murky. The modeling visas, the dates that didn't add up, the quiet questions about green cards, work authorizations, and sponsor signatures that were never really answered. But it never mattered because she married the right man, had the right accent, wore the right shoes, and Jasmine Crockett. She had the nerve to point that out, not as gossip, not as a smear, but as a cold, undeniable comparison. One that hit too close for some people. That's why the pushback came so quick, why the headlines twisted her words before the sentence was even finished. But Crockett didn't blink because she wasn't improvising. She was building off a lifetime of moments where people like her were asked to show papers, justify their accents, prove they were from here. So no, that hearing wasn't her going rogue. It was her refusing to let one more lie about loyalty go unchecked. But outside that hearing room, another storm was building. And it had Trump's fingerprints all over it. By sunset, Jasmine Crockett's name was everywhere. And Donald Trump noticed. The first post hit Truth Social just before 10 p.m. It was written in all caps, as if the keyboard itself had been screaming, "Disgusting attack on Melania. Jasmine Crockett should be ashamed of herself. She should apologize to the First Lady immediately." Then another. These people hate America. They hate success. They hate beauty. They want to cancel patriots and protect criminals. Melania came here legally. Crockett is a nobody looking for ratings. The reactions poured in like fuel on a fire. Some people, already looking for someone to blame for everything wrong with their lives, clung to Trump's words like gospel. They didn't even bother watching the clip. They didn't care what was actually said. The headline was enough, and suddenly, Jasmine's name wasn't just trending. It was attached to words like traitor, racist, and un-American. Cable news jumped in too. By midnight, her face was flashing across 3 different networks, each one running their own version of what happened. Some showed the clip, others showed a screenshot and quoted the line out of context, making it sound like Crockett had personally marched into the East Wing and demanded Melania's deportation. Her phone was vibrating non-stop. Texts, calls, mentions, hate messages, death threats. And some people, the ones who knew better, started asking, "Are you okay?" But she wasn't rattled because Crockett knew what Trump was doing. It was his favorite play: spin outrage into distraction, throw red meat to the base, and never address the original point. The irony? His post didn't defend Melania's immigration record. He didn't correct anything Jasmine said. He just reacted, loud, angry, emotional, and counted on everyone else to do the rest. Her chief of staff, Lane Robbins, was still in the office when it dropped. "Here we go," Lane muttered, watching the flood of headlines come in. Jasmine walked in holding a mug of chamomile tea, as calm as ever. "Melania is trending under Ted Einstein visa," she said, raising an eyebrow. "I didn't even start that one." Lane cracked a half smile. "You know they're going to try to drag you for this." "They've been trying," she said, settling into the chair. "Now they just have better lighting." She didn't post anything that night, didn't respond to Trump, didn't throw a counterpunch. Instead, her team uploaded the full uncut video of the hearing to her official YouTube channel. No edits, no commentary, just the footage. Her tone, her words, her receipts. The truth, uninterrupted. Within an hour, it had over 800,000 views. People weren't just watching. They were studying, dissecting, sharing it with captions like, "Watch the whole thing." She didn't lie, and funny how they can dish it but can't take it. Meanwhile, Trump kept posting like clockwork. Every few hours, each post angrier than the last. Some of them didn't even mention Jasmine by name anymore. They just threw around phrases like radical left, race baiters, America headers. But it wasn't working the way it used to, because this time, people were asking questions, some of them uncomfortable. Like, why is a black congresswoman getting called a racist for pointing out a fact? Or, why doesn't anyone talk about Melania's Immigration record? Or the hardest one, why do the rules only seem to apply to some of us? Even a few conservative commentators, the ones who still pretended to care about integrity, admitted that Crockett hadn't lied. She hadn't even insulted Melania. She just asked a question. And that scared people more than any insult ever could. But while the internet was busy throwing punches, something else was happening. Something you wouldn't see in the headlines, but was about to change everything. By sunrise, Crockett's clip had crossed state lines. Not just in views, but in tone. Local stations in places like Fresno, Tulsa, and Dayton began replaying the footage, then asking a simple question: was she wrong? And that was the problem for her critics. She hadn't made anything up. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't insulted. She asked the question calmly, directly, with a tone that was impossible to misquote. And now millions of people were watching that clip and coming to their own conclusions. By 9 a.m., she was booked for 2 national interviews. One with MSNBC, the other with CBS Mornings. She chose CBS first. Her team met at a small studio just off Connecticut Avenue. Hair, makeup, MIC. As they prepped, Lane scrolled through the headlines, reading a few out loud. Crockett swipe it. Melania stirs national debate. That one's fair, she said. But then you've got, is this what decency looks like now? From the Sentinel. And my personal favorite, Congresswoman weaponizes immigration history in political ambush. Jasmine raised a brow. Ambush? I asked a question. The same kind they ask folks who look like me every damn day. The anchor on CBS, Elaine Truitt, went straight in. Congresswoman, you've been accused of attacking the former First Lady. Do you think your remarks went too far? Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned forward, steady. I think it's fascinating how asking a question about fairness suddenly gets labeled as an attack. What I said wasn't wild. What's wild is that people are more upset about me saying it than about the double standards it exposes. Truitt nodded slowly. You're saying this wasn't personal? I don't know Melania. I don't wish her harm. But if we're going to keep pretending that this country treats everyone the same, then we need to be honest. Some folks are allowed to stumble through the process and still be celebrated. Others get one technicality wrong and end up in deportation. Court, that clip, just 40 seconds, was reposted over 4 million times. Meanwhile, the usual suspects on cable news fumed. One anchor on Patriot Channel News called her a bitter woman with a vendetta. Another said she hated traditional American families, but the damage wasn't sticking. People were watching her speak, watching the way she carried herself, and realizing something that even her enemies didn't want to admit. She wasn't wrong. At the same time, Twitter was in full rebellion mode. Young immigrants were posting their own stories with the hashtag I am Jasmine, stories of having to prove over and over again that they belonged, of being pulled out of lines, asked more questions, held longer, doubted louder. One user wrote, my mum was nearly deported for a typo in her paperwork. But Melania, she got a modeling visa renewed how many times? Jasmine said what needed to be said. Still, the backlash was real. Her team had to lock down the office email after it was hit with thousands of hate messages. Some were just angry, others were violent. One message read, keep your mouth shut or we'll do it for her. Lane flagged that one for the FBI, but Crockett didn't back down. Later that afternoon, she sat with a college reporter from Ann Arbor who asked, did you ever consider apologizing? Jasmine tilted her head, then replied, apologize for what? Telling the truth. Asking the kind of question that gets asked of people like me all the time. That's not something I regret. That's something I wish more people had the guts to do, and that was what made her dangerous to some. She didn't yell or she didn't cry. She didn't retreat. She just kept showing up, saying what others were too scared to say, with poise, calm, and clarity. She wasn't trying to win the argument. She was changing the conversation, but while Crockett held her ground in the spotlight, a different kind of reaction was building away from cameras, one that would soon make this much bigger than just politics. The first major spark came from Mesa, Arizona. A protest had already been planned outside the federal courthouse, originally set to focus on the growing number of undocumented deportation cases happening quietly without much media attention. But once the Crockett clip went viral, organizers adjusted their signs. Her name was everywhere. One woman, Ana Ruiz, 27, born in Flagstaff to parents who came from Mexico in the early 90s, stood on the courthouse steps holding A cardboard sign that simply read, "If she gets to stay, so should my dad." It was blunt, personal, impossible to ignore. The protest swelled quickly. It wasn't massive, not like some of the coast city marches, but it was loud, visible, and raw. Over 500 people showed up: teachers, nurses, veterans, students. Some holding homemade signs, others holding photos of family members stuck in green card limbo, and the chant that broke through the noise: "Same rules, same rights, no more silence." The Mesa protest made the evening news, not because of violence. There wasn't any, but because of how directly it linked the Crockett conversation to everyday lives. Suddenly, this wasn't about politics anymore. It was about families, about fairness, about the two sets of rules everyone had been pretending didn't exist, even in places you wouldn't expect, like Shreveport, Louisiana, or Lincoln, Nebraska. Small town halls filled with chatter about the Crockett moment. High school debate coaches used it as a real-time example. Civics teachers played the clip in class. In Birmingham, a college professor paused her lecture and said, "Let's talk about this. Why does this make people uncomfortable?" At the same time, conservative media was trying to bury it with noise. One syndicated host said, "This is what happens when people who hate this country get elected. They tear down good women like Melania to push their bitter, divisive garbage." But the needle wasn't moving the way it used to. Even some of Trump's more moderate followers were whispering things like, "Well, she didn't lie, technically," and "You gotta admit, it's a fair question." Then, as if on cue, someone pulled the fire alarm. A new video started making the rounds on Reddit, allegedly from a 2001 interview Melania did with a Slovenian TV outlet, where she made vague comments about working in the US before her paperwork was fully processed. It wasn't concrete, but it was enough to poke at something the public had never really questioned too deeply, and that's when the noise shifted. Because now it wasn't just, did Crockett cross a line? It became, wait, what are the facts here? Fact checkers got involved. Immigration attorneys weighed in. People began digging up old reports that had mostly been ignored. The kind of stuff no one cared about when she was posing in designer gowns. Suddenly, the question Crockett asked wasn't outrageous anymore. It was unavoidable. In Phoenix, a woman named Donisha Fuller was sitting at her dining table, scrolling through the news on her tablet, when she turned to her husband and said, "She's not saying Melania should be deported. She's saying if they're going to treat us like suspects, then we get to ask questions too." Her husband nodded slowly. "People don't like mirrors," he muttered, "especially when they don't recognize what's looking back at them." Jasmine Crockett, in the meantime, was working on legislation. Not a flashy bill, not anything the cameras would love, but a quiet amendment that would require full transparency from high-profile immigration applicants. No more sealed files, no more loopholes for the wealthy or well-connected. She didn't announce it right away. She was waiting. Not because she was scared, but because she knew when to move. But while Crockett was preparing for the next chapter, someone from the past was about to reappear and bring with them something no one saw coming. The threats were getting darker. Crockett's team had stopped opening physical mail unless it came through official channels. Too many of the handwritten ones came with scribbled slurs, torn-up flags, and once, just once, a bullet casing taped to the inside of an envelope. The FBI had quietly started keeping eyes on her office, but Jasmine wouldn't let it change. Her rhythm, "They want you scared," she told Lane one night, standing by the office window, watching DC lights flicker in the distance. "They want to see you shrink," but the truth was, she was tired. Not broken, not defeated, just tired. It was late, almost midnight, when she finally left the office and went home. No staff, no calls, just quiet. Her apartment in Tacoma didn't look like a politician's place. No press photos, no framed invitations, just soft lighting, a couch that had seen too many naps, and a faded photo of her and her mother at her law school graduation, still stuck to the fridge with a cracked magnet. She kicked off her shoes, reheated some leftover curry, and sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, scrolling through messages, skipping past the garbage, reading the ones that felt real. One stood out, a voicemail from earlier in the day. It was her mother. "Hey baby, you're busy, I know, but just remember what I told you. They don't get to define you. Not ever. Not even when it's loud. Especially when it's loud." She let it play twice. Then she called her back. Her mum picked up immediately. No hesitation, like she'd been waiting by the phone all day. "Hey mama, "Hey baby, you okay? I'm holding. That's not what I asked." Jasmine didn't answer right away. Her voice caught for just a second. "They're trying to flip this. Say I hate the country. Say I'm attacking women." Her mother didn't yell, didn't rant, just let the silence sit. Then she said, "Truth doesn't always come out clean. Sometimes it comes out with bruises, but it still comes out." That hit hard. They talked for another 20 minutes about small things. Church, her uncle's arthritis, the neighbor who couldn't figure out how to work their new leaf blower. Jasmine laughed for the first time in days. That laughter carried her through the next morning, because the pressure was still there, and the calls kept coming. One of them came from someone she hadn't heard from in years, Eli Kwan, a former immigration lawyer who'd once worked with her on a legal clinic in Oak Park, back in Texas. They hadn't spoken since she left for Congress, but his name showed up on her calendar as a private meeting. No subject listed. He showed up with a manila envelope and eyes that looked like they hadn't seen sleep in 2 days. "Are we secure?" he asked, sitting down across from her. Lane shut the office door. Eli slid the folder across the desk. "This isn't public yet, but it will be. And when it is, it's going to flip this entire narrative." Inside were scanned documents, old ones, immigration filings, correspondence, notes from Melania Trump's early visa applications. One letter in particular stood out, a request for reconsideration that mentioned freelance work performed before official work authorization was approved. Jasmine read it twice, then sat back. "You've verified this?" "Yes." Quietly. "I had to triple check it. I've been sitting on it for weeks, but now it matters." Lane stared at the folder like it was ticking. "Why give it to me?" Eli exhaled. "Because you didn't lie, and because you're the only one saying the quiet part out loud." Jasmine closed the folder gently. Her hands didn't tremble. Her voice didn't rise. She just said, "Okay, let's get ready." But while they prepared to drop what could shake the entire conversation, someone else, someone unexpected, was watching the same headlines and about to make their voice heard. They came in waves. Not politicians, not pundits, but people. Everyday folks who'd had enough of the noise, who saw something in Jasmine Crockett's question that felt personal, honest, familiar. The first voice came from El Paso. A young teacher named Marisol Jimenez posted a short video on Instagram. No background music, no fancy edits. Just her, standing in front of a whiteboard still covered in lesson notes. "I'm not here to talk about parties," she said, "but I will say this. I've had to explain to my third graders why their parents have to carry certain papers with them everywhere. And those same third graders watched adults get mad because someone questioned how a white European woman came here." Think about that. The clip exploded. Over 3 million views in a weekend. Comments poured in. Teachers, students, parents, all of them echoing the same feeling: the system doesn't apply equally. And when someone finally says it out loud, they're painted as the problem. In Minneapolis, a former Army veteran named Andre Colvin, black, 58, full beard, slow speaker, uploaded a video from his backyard. Birds chirped in the distance as he sat on a plastic lawn chair, holding a glass of iced tea. "I served this country," he said, voice steady, "twice, and I still get asked where I'm really from." I don't know this Congresswoman personally, but she asked a question I've been biting my tongue on for years. If that makes her un-American, what does that make me? Then came the youth. College students in Sacramento staged a sit-in. Not loud, not angry, just sitting. Each one holding signs with only questions written on them. Who gets to belong? Why do papers matter more for some? What if she was right? Photos of the sit-in hit Twitter, then TikTok, then the New York Times. At a barbershop in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, an older man named Harold Simps was cutting hair when a customer asked him if he'd seen the Jasmine stuff. Harold paused mid-fade and said, "She didn't say anything I haven't said right here 100 times. Only difference is, she said it in front of a camera." The barbershop fell quiet. Then someone mumbled, "Yeah, but she said it better." It wasn't just praise. It was clarity. People weren't rallying around her because she yelled. They were rallying because she didn't. Because in a world full of noise, someone asking a calm, precise question hit harder than any slogan, and quietly, almost too quietly. Crockett's approval numbers began to rise. Independents, young voters, second-generation immigrants, even a sliver of moderate conservatives. Not all of them agreed with her politics, but they respected the way she handled herself. No name-calling, no spin, just facts delivered with backbone. One newspaper in Toledo ran a Sunday op-ed titled "The Question Heard Round the Country." The writer, a 60-year-old pastor, wrote, "We can argue about tone. We can argue about timing. But what we can't argue with is the truth. The only reason that question shook so many people is because, deep down, they already knew the answer." Meanwhile, Jasmine kept moving. She didn't ride the wave. She didn't tweet victory laps. She spent the week visiting schools, veteran centers, and sitting in on immigration hearings without cameras. She showed up. That was her statement, and yet, behind all the public support, there were whispers. Big ones. Because when the documents from Eli Kwan's folder finally began circulating, carefully leaked through credible journalists and verified by legal analysts, the conversation tilted again. Reporters started asking, if this paperwork is real, why hasn't it ever been addressed? Former Homeland Security staff refused to comment. The Trump team issued a vague statement about misinformation, but the document scans were clear. Dates didn't match. Declarations contradicted filings. It wasn't a smoking gun, not quite, but it was smoke, real smoke. And once smoke starts rising, people look for fire, but before the blaze could spread, someone even closer to Melania was about to speak. And what she'd say would flip everything upside down. She hadn't spoken publicly in over 5 years. Not since leaving the administration. Not even to promote her book. But on a grey Thursday morning, out of nowhere, Melania Trump's former aide, a woman named Sonia Lavelle, appeared on a podcast called The Politic Room, hosted by former journalist Brian Voss. The episode was unannounced. No teaser, no warning. Just Sonia's voice, quiet but deliberate. "I never thought I'd be doing this," she began. "But what I saw happen to Jasmine Crockett this week, it made me feel like silence was complicity, and just like that, the country's attention shifted again." Sonia had worked with Melania for years. Personal scheduling, travel prep, PR coordination. She wasn't high profile. You wouldn't know her name unless you read staff memos. But she was there, and she remembered everything. There were always questions, she said, about the visa timelines, about the work history. "I remember once, back in 2001, Melania got really nervous after a magazine asked her about her modeling days before her green card came through. She said, 'I don't want people going through my papers,' and I remember thinking, why would they?" The host leaned in. "Are you saying she admitted she wasn't legal at some point?" Sonia paused. "I'm saying the timeline doesn't add up. And we all knew it didn't. But no one wanted to be the one to say it out loud." That quote hit headlines within the hour. Within a day, it was everywhere. CNN, USA Today, local papers from Reno to Tallahassee. Crockett didn't respond immediately. She didn't have to. The story was rolling on its own now. Fact-checkers who had previously been cautious began publishing deeper dives. One from the Austin Ledger revealed that Melania's H-1B visa had specific work restrictions that, based on modeling job dates, may have been violated. The White House, back when she was First Lady, had brushed it off, called it a paperwork issue, but now, in this moment, that excuse didn't fly. Because the country was already rethinking what fairness meant when Crockett had asked the question. They called her divisive. Now that the answers were surfacing, people weren't so sure, and quietly, something else began happening. A shift. Talk radio hosts who'd spent days calling Crockett vile began changing their language. They didn't apologize. Not directly. But their tone softened. "She may have had a point," one said. "I still think her delivery was confrontational, but maybe there is a double standard worth discussing." It wasn't a concession, but it was. Something. In Jacksonville, a retired immigration officer named Kendra Blaine posted a video on Facebook, speaking directly to the camera. "I've processed over 8,000 cases in my career. If any of those folks had Melania's discrepancies on file, they would have been denied or flagged for review. We need to stop pretending this is normal." Her post hit 2 million views in 48 hours. The floodgates opened from there. Crockett's inbox began to shift. Less hate mail, more thank you notes. Stories, confessions, questions from people who finally felt like someone had cracked open the door. But Jasmine wasn't gloating. At her next press conference, she stood in front of a backdrop that simply read "Same rules, same country," and all she said was this: "I didn't come here to play games. I came here to represent the people who never get the benefit of the doubt." This was never about Melania. This was about principle. If one group has to follow the rules, then everyone should. Period. It wasn't fiery. It wasn't long, but it landed. People clapped, not because they were told to, but because the truth finally felt visible. But before this moment could settle, one final interview was about to break, one that would show exactly why Crockett's question had mattered so much in the first place. The studio lights were bright, but Jasmine Crockett wasn't rattled. She sat comfortably across from Maya Redding, anchor of the Sunday night primetime series Truth Seat. It was the highest-rated political show of the year, and this was her first long-form interview since the firestorm began. There was no podium to hide behind, no staff to cut in. Just two chairs, one question after another, and millions watching. Maya started direct. Congresswoman Crockett, you've become the center of a national conversation that you never technically started. When you made the remark about Melania Trump's visa history, did you expect this kind of reaction? Jasmine blinked once, then smiled faintly. I expected discomfort. I didn't expect distortion. Maya leaned in. So let's go back. What exactly were you trying to say? Jasmine paused, not to buy time, but to choose her words carefully. What I said and what I meant was about consistency. We've built a system in this country that constantly interrogates certain people's legitimacy, whether it's a last name, an accent, a birthplace. And the folks doing the interrogating rarely get questioned themselves. She gestured slightly with her hand. Melania Trump is one example. She benefited from a process that many others would have been penalized for. That's not an insult. That's not hate. That's reality. Maya nodded. But some people say bringing up the former First Lady's immigration status was a personal attack. Then they're not listening. I wasn't talking about her as a person. I was talking about what her path represents. How some people are quietly given passes while others are loudly prosecuted. I've defended teenagers who got ice holds placed on them because of clerical errors. Meanwhile, we're told not to ask questions about inconsistencies tied to powerful figures. Why? There was a moment of silence, the kind that always hits harder than shouting. Maya shifted. You've also received a lot of support, rallies, opinion pieces, even unexpected praise from moderate voters. What do you think resonated with people? They saw someone ask the question they've been sitting on for years. They saw someone not flinch when the blowback came. But more importantly, they saw how quickly the conversation gets twisted when truth touches power. Maya gave a half smile. And now there's talk of you being a national figure, possible Senate run, even whispers about higher office. Thoughts? Jasmine laughed softly, not dismissively. I didn't say what I said for ambition. I said it because I was tired of watching folks swallow their truth to make other people comfortable. Backstage, Lane watched from the green room, phone in one hand, jaw tense. The studio had given them only one live feed, and she was watching closely, not for missteps, but for impact. And she saw it. People weren't just watching Jasmine, they were connecting. Not to a headline, not to a soundbite, but to a person. After the interview, social media erupted again. Only this time, not in chaos, in reflection. Clips from the interview were posted and reposted. One line especially stuck: if we are truly one country under the law, then we shouldn't need reminders that some people's paperwork gets handled more gently than others' entire lives. That quote was printed on t-shirts by the end of the week. It showed up on protest signs in Milwaukee, bumper stickers in Fresno, and a hand-painted mural outside a community center in Albuquerque. But for Jasmine, it was never about branding. It was about forcing a conversation that had been deferred too long. She left the studio quietly. No entourage, just Lane and one staffer trailing behind. On the sidewalk, a woman in her 50s walked up hesitantly. She didn't introduce herself, just said, "My brother got deported 5 years ago. He filed late. One form. That's all it took. He's still in Honduras. And you said what I wish I could have said to someone's face." Jasmine held her gaze and simply nodded. Sometimes words don't need to be repeated. Sometimes presence is enough. But even with the storm behind her, Crockett still had one thing left to say. And it would bring everything full circle. She stood at a small podium in Baltimore, Maryland, not at a glitzy fundraiser or high-profile gala, but in the gymnasium of Carver Vocational Technical High School. No teleprompter, no press swarm, just folding chairs, students, teachers, and a few reporters with notebooks. Jasmine Crockett looked around at the faces. Kids wearing sneakers, oversized hoodies, hair in braids, shaved close, dyed purple. These weren't political junkies. They weren't pundits. They were future voters. Some would be voting for the first time in 2 years. And she spoke to them like she always did. Direct, no fluff. You're going to be told a lot of things about who you are, about where you come from, about what you deserve. And most of the time, it won't come from facts. It'll come from fear, from folks who need to keep you in a small box because they're afraid of what happens when you start asking real questions. She paused. Let it settle. Let me tell you something. Asking questions isn't un-American. It's the most American thing there is. One student in the back clapped first. Then the rest followed. Not a standing ovation, just enough to show they heard her. They felt her. That's all she ever really wanted. The fallout from her statement about Melania Trump had taken over the national conversation for nearly 2 weeks. And when the dust finally started to clear, what was left behind wasn't scandal. It was something far more dangerous to the status quo. Curiosity. People had started asking their own questions about green cards, about policy inconsistencies, about who really benefits from discretion and who gets punished by the rules. For some politicians, that shift was terrifying because it meant the days of deflecting were numbered. For Jasmine, it meant her job was just beginning. Reporters were still trying to bait her into back and forths with Trump, still trying to squeeze another headline from her. But she refused to play the same game twice. He's loud, she said in one interview. But volume doesn't equal truth. Behind closed doors, she kept working. That amendment on high-profile immigration transparency, it had already picked up bipartisan interest. Quietly, of course. No one wanted to admit they were listening, but they were. Even staffers from offices that had once laughed off her name were now asking for copies of her notes. In Philadelphia, an immigrant advocacy group named Project Waypoint launched a campaign called #SameStandard, inspired directly by her viral moment. The goal, push for equal application of immigration enforcement, regardless of wealth, notoriety, or political connection. Jasmine didn't take credit. She didn't post about it, but her team donated the maximum allowed, and the girl who once defended teenagers in back rooms with fluorescent lights and one working AC unit. She was now shaping the next generation of legal reform, but more than that, she'd done something most lawmakers spend careers trying and failing to do. She told the truth clearly and stood by it, even when it burned, especially when it burned. She left the school gym that afternoon. A student followed her to the parking lot, maybe 16 or 17 years old, hoodie pulled low. He didn't say much, just handed her a crumpled sheet of notebook paper with a few lines scrawled on it. It read, "I used to think I had to stay quiet. Thanks for showing me that I don't." She didn't cry. She smiled. That slow, quiet kind of smile. That says more than a speech ever could, because that was the point. Not proving anyone wrong. Not going viral. The point was the truth, saying it when it mattered, and showing others that it's not just okay to speak up. It's necessary. If this story made you feel something, if it pushed you to think a little deeper about fairness, truth, or what real representation looks like, then don't just scroll away. Subscribe. Share the story. Have the hard conversation. Because silence doesn't protect you, but truth might just set something in motion.